Hello everybody, welcome to week 3. In our last meeting, we talked about some writing skills to do with writing a strong first sentence and how to write a great lead. This week we pivot to reporting skills, and before we can begin reporting, we need to know what to report about. For people who write a lot about social justice or are very interested in issues of social justice, writing about political figures and political institutions becomes very, very important. And today we're going to talk about how to find stories and how to cover stories that are happening at institutional levels, such as government, school boards, and so on. We're also going to we're going to revisit the topic of avoiding the no news trap, which is when you're covering meetings and you spend more time writing about the details of the meeting than you do the actual importance of what was covered. We talked about that last week, but it's worth mentioning again. So the institutions that we're going to talk about most particularly include government. Of course, we have government at several levels. We have government at the federal, state, county, and city levels, and we'll talk about 3 of those: state and city, and to some extent county. And we'll talk about school boards. School boards are very important right now, and they're a place where a lot of things are being litigated to do with trans rights and freedom to be LGBTQ and know that at a young age. So it's important to know how to keep track of what schools are doing. Elections are also very important. We'll talk about where to go and how to find information about campaigns. And we'll talk about courts. And of course, we have 2 levels of court that interest us mostly. The first being the federal level, and the second being the state level. So let's begin by talking about some of the places that these institutions keep information, or some of the gatekeepers to information. One of the best ways that you can follow institutions, not all of them equally, but certainly many of them, is through Twitter. Almost all institutions have a Twitter feed, and that a lot of times they put their breaking news on Twitter before they put it anywhere else. One case in particular is Seattle Police Department. They also have a blotter, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And also you can get police reports, and I'll talk about the most important documents that you can get, which you usually get from the prosecutor, including search warrants, but also something very important called the Affidavit of Probable Cause. When you're covering crime, typically if you have access to radio frequencies, then you can find out about situations that are unfolding, and you can actually go to the scene itself, which there's some caution you have to exercise in those cases. Following courts is important when we're following crimes that have occurred, or when we're following lawsuits. And lawsuits can be incredibly politically important. So I'll tell you where to find the documents and other online court and jail records. And then also you can talk to the people. It's really important to make friends inside these institutions. Somebody who's on your side, who will let you know when something is going on and what to do about it. For example, I had some people who felt pretty positive about the way I covered their hospital. And so when a hostile takeover was possible for that hospital, the hospital staff, the public information officer in particular, reached out to me and said, hey, you really need to file a public records request for all of our emails because they're not telling the truth. And so I walked in to fill out the public records request form, and the ink wasn't dry before the documents were in my hands. So it's very important to cultivate people at these institutions. So we talk about the before and after principle. Once we know what it is that we would like to cover, we've found meeting agendas, or we found a speech that's going to take place, there's some things you need to do before the event and things you need to do after the event. These are unfortunately missed, sometimes even by people who do this for a living. So part of the before is check the clips, and that means Google and use the News tab. Search Google using the News tab for other stories that have been written about this thing. So if a court case has blown up about trans rights to use bathrooms in public schools, this would involve finding out anything you can about what this school district has done about this sort of thing before, what other school districts have done. If you have the names of the plaintiffs, it's a good idea to look through their history to see how seriously to take them for one thing, because there are many lawsuits that are brought by people who are not very sophisticated at law, who are just sort of trying to make a point. So it's good to know if you're looking at an activist, or if you're looking at somebody who is genuinely aggrieved, or if you're looking at somebody that is sort of picking a fight. So then look at online for other background information, anything else that you can find out that's not been written in the press. If you can find any record of schools being sued for similar things before within the same district, that would be an example of looking for background information. Look for background information on all of the people who are named in the suit, or anything else to do. So if the governor is giving a speech about trans rights in Washington State, for example, which did happen recently, getting online, looking at the history of the issue, and finding out who the major players are that you can go to for comment after the speech, and so on. We're going to talk about how to find meeting agendas and how to report off them, but if you know something is going through City Council, for example, you need to know how to get a hold of their meeting agenda and kind of how to read it, how to understand what it is that you're seeing, and how to know when it is important to show up. You can always get copies of speeches made by major public figures. So we'll talk about how you can go about getting those. And then, as you do this sort of due diligence, you want to think about the questions that this gives you, or the questions that proceed from this. And know those questions, have them firmly in your mind, write them down somewhere, and don't leave a situation until those questions have been answered. So if you're going to a city council meeting, for example, you have questions that you need answered about one particular thing that's on the agenda. City council meetings can be unfortunately quite long, and they can be also very distracting, because there's so many issues that are being discussed, and sometimes there's a lot of drama at those things with protests and infighting and that sort of thing. So it's good to have the question that you need answered written down, and know who it is you're going to talk to. And so the minute they stand up and get off the dais, then you jump up and head directly for the person that you have questions for, and be ready to go with your questions. So just be prepared to know what it is that you don't know, and who it is you're going to ask, and what it is you're going to ask of them. Now, you come in with questions in mind, but new things arise all the time, and a very common mistake that is made by beginning journalists is sticking too closely to the questions they had planned and missing an obvious story that isn't what they had in mind. Kind of a amusing case in point was a time that I was looking for some stories to write for my paper's lifestyle section, and I found out that a local woman had been on the cover of Prevention magazine because she'd lost like 115 pounds, and it was half her body weight. And you know, diet stories are a perennial in news, and so I called her up and asked her, you know, could we do a story? And she said, sure, meet me at my house. So I found her house, and as I pulled up into the driveway, I crossed a moat, and I was looking at a replication castle. I got inside, and there were secret passageways in the hallways for the cats, and there were full coats of armor in the dining room, and I realized this is a better story, and I abandoned the diet altogether. I came back to it and did something about it several months later, but I said, we're going to write about your house. You have to be prepared to be redirected by chance or by things that come up, and stay flexible mentally. Once you go to your event and you've gotten your questions answered, and you've got the copy of the speech, or you've got your notes from the meeting, um, this is the point at which many professional reporters stop. And there's a reason for that. They're very strapped for time. You have the luxury of having the time to do the job right. So for you, it is possible to not then just write the story based on what was said at the meeting or what was in the speech, but to go out and find more about what that means. Actually do a little digging to find out if what they said is true or if it can be challenged on factual points. What it means to other people in the community and reactions from people who are stakeholders. So continue to develop questions about what is proceeding or unfolding in the issue that you're covering. One of the most important things to do is tell people why they care. Why do they care about this city council meeting? Why do they care about what's going on at this school in some part of Seattle in which they don't live, or some other county in which they don't live? Keep track of who is paying for what. This is a big deal. For example, public information, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but public records informations are frequently politically weaponized. And so if someone doesn't like the politics of an institution, they may launch an overwhelming number of public information requests as a way as a form of legal harassment. And this did happen to a professor at the University of Washington quite frequently. She writes about right-wing misinformation, and her work has attracted the attention of some people who are very hostile to that kind of research. And so they've got it in their head that she's being funded by the government, that the government, the deep state, is funding her work to discredit the right. And so they have launched dozens, if not hundreds, of Freedom of Information access requests for all of her emails to basically anyone in the institution, and they have the right to get it because a university is publicly funded. But it's important to find out who's paying, and you can find out who is paying for public records requests. And we found out that who is paying is a conservative group that's very well funded, that is pretty well known for doing this kind of thing as a form of harassment. So anytime you have the opportunity to see who is paying for what, it can be very revealing to know that it's being paid for by a political operative, or a political action committee, or someone else with motives that may differ slightly from what it says on the tin. So less concern about Kate Starbird's particular moral ethics and more concern about punishing universities for doing this kind of work. Don't take anything officials say at face value. There are many honorable officials, and I tend to try to push back on people who vilify all politicians. There are many good civic-minded politicians out there, but there are many who are not, especially the ones that have been there for a very long time. So find out why they're taking the positions that they're taking, what is informing their decisions. Again, find out who's paying, look at people who provide them with campaign donations. Try to look a little bit below the hood on what they're saying motivates what their actions are, to see if there may be another story to tell. So once you have an issue that you are interested in covering, or if you are looking for things to cover, just keeping kind of a watchdog eye out for things that may be going on that are of interest to people who are interested in social justice. And then you've got to navigate the difficult maze of institutions and bureaucracies to find out how to get to the good stuff. Well, all government institutions are legally required to post information about upcoming meetings at which they have a quorum or a body of legislators large enough to make a binding decision or take a binding vote. And so it doesn't matter who it is, from the school board to the planning commission to the city council, any institution that is public, even large universities, hospitals, and so on, have to have publicly published agendas ahead of time. It's just knowing where to go look for them, right? So at the City of Seattle, you can go to seattlelegistar.com. This is true for Seattle, but a little Googling will get you to the site that, say, Tacoma or Olympia or any other city posts its agendas. There's always a newspaper of public record in each place, but it can be more difficult to find out where that is than it is to just regularly check online. This is a City of Seattle. This is what the City of Seattle City Council agenda sort of looks like. The cover page will tell you when it is and where it is, and then in the ensuing pages there will be an agenda of things that will be discussed, and it's surprising sometimes how manageable these documents are. This particular one is only 5 pages long, and there's only 11 items on the docket being the schedule of things that will be discussed, and most of those are actually things that are non-controversial. A lot of times the city council has to approve certain expenses, and it's done routinely, so there's some routine things that have to be done. But there are 5 or 6 things which might provoke some controversy, such that if you were interested in any of those issues, you might wish to be present. And here's an example here from the Public Safety and Human Services Committee. So one thing that could be puzzling, and I tell you, I was baffled at first, and I think reporters should have to take a city or government governing class at some point so that they don't get so thrown in on the deep end. But almost all governments, except for very small ones, do the majority of their work in committees. And so a committee will decide whether to write a law or whether to accept a law, most cases accepting laws, but some at the city level and so on do also draft legislation. And then they vote on it to see to see if it's going to pass out of committee, is the term. And if it does pass out of committee, the group or the committee will make a recommendation to the city council about whether they should pass the thing. Now, I've seen this happen a very, very lot with land planning. For example, planning commissions decide about rezoning or whether to accept like a conditional use permit that makes it so this one rich developer can develop a swamp or wetlands. This is actually something I followed for years. This one developer was absolutely bound and determined to get an exception to the law to allow him to build a structure on a wetlands. And he had friends on the planning commission, so the planning commission routinely voted for his rezone and forwarded it to the city council with recommendation that they pass this rezone. And every single time the city council looked at it and said, that is ridiculous. You cannot possibly have this rezone. It is preposterous. And I called it the zombie rezone because it came back every single year. But here we see the Public and Safety. This is something that I cut and pasted off this agenda. This is the Public and Safety and Human Services Committee, and this has to do with labor standards for people who work on apps, which is kind of a big deal here in Seattle. The committee has drafted legislation. You can actually go look at that. It won't be in the legislation, but you will be able to find the draft of the ordinance. And it also shows who voted for the ordinance to pass out of committee. That can be pretty telling if you know the politics of the people who are on that committee. So if you're really interested in public safety and human services, which as a reporter you should be, that's where a lot of interesting things happen. It can be pretty important to know who's voting and know the politics of those people, because that can really send up some red flags. Um, Writing about the Washington legislature or any state legislature is pretty complex, but we are fortunate in Washington that our legislature and our government web pages tend to be very, very easy to access and logical to navigate, such that people come to Washington State to research what happens when governments make access to information available to citizens. So we are fortunate in that regard. Um, this is the homepage of the Washington State Legislature, and as you can see, there are a lot of sub-menus and so on. Over here it says Legislature Home. Now, the legislature only makes laws for 3 to 4 months a year during the legislative session, and that is generally between January and April. But there are other things going on all the time. Committees may meet year-round. Other business is being kept, so it's important to keep an eye on legislature year-round, but most importantly for that first 4 months of the year. So here you can see your House of Representatives. If you go to the House of Representatives, you can find your own representatives. You can find the numbers for their. You can click through to their websites, find the numbers for their offices, and so on. You can find your district using maps. Then the most important, though, you can also see the Senate, of course. There's a House and a Senate. But the most important for the purposes of people who cover the legislature and the legislative session is bill information. And this has to do with all of the bills that have been proposed for the session, and over the course of the session there may be about 2,000 bills, so that's a lot. But you can search them by topic, and that makes it a lot more manageable. Last year, there were 2,000 and change bills proposed in the Washington legislature. I'm going to say last year, I mean this year in the session that ended in April. And 600 of them were passed into law. So it's not a given that something that is proposed will be passed or even entertained. But this is where you go to find out if you are interested in trans rights or if you're interested in any other kind of legal rights for minority groups. This is where you would go to start keeping track of what people are doing, for better or for worse. There's also agendas, schedules, and calendars. The legislative session is overwhelming, and of course not everybody's got the luxury to travel to Olympia to see what's going on, but many of these meetings are recorded, and you can get the recordings afterwards. And then that gives you the luxury of skimming through and fast forwarding to the part that's important to you. That's how I used to cover city council in the city that I was most responsible for as a reporter. You would think that, the thing to do would be to show up, but I didn't have that kind of time. Most reporters don't anymore. There are only a few that are assigned full-time to the Capitol, and that press pool is shrinking all the time. So more and more of us are working off of records that are kept online, recordings that are kept online. There's the agenda there that you can look and see what each of the committees is getting ready to talk about. And then it's got some civic education, like how do things become a law. I highly recommend that you take a look at some of the information about how laws work, how things come into the legislature, who writes bills, how they get onto the agenda, what a companion bill is. That is because when one bill goes through a House, a companion bill has to go through the Senate, and they both have to pass for it to go to what we call reconciliation, where the two bills are made to match. And then how they get out to the general vote. And then there's still one more hurdle to cross, and that's the governor's signature, the president's signature, or mayor's signature. Many of those people have veto power. So there will be information about how to write a bill, how to introduce a bill, and how bills work their way through legislative bodies. So this is a great resource. There's also a menu that's partially obscured by my photo, but it has a lot more information about finding your legislators, and many other resources that are going to be very, very useful to you if you do this kind of work. So when it comes to the Washington State Legislature, we are blessed. Notice that I posted the website of the Washington State Legislature, which is leg.wa.gov, on the first slide about the different bodies of government that we're going to talk about today. Then, of course, elections are tremendously important. And election coverage is a year-round kind of thing. The campaigns themselves happen during what many reporters actually call the silly season, which is when politics gets ridiculous. But people are preparing their campaigns years ahead. There are deadlines to declare that you plan to campaign, and those are usually far in advance of when the actual campaigns get rolling. It's really important to know who's running as soon as you possibly can find out. Then it's really interesting to follow donations and who is donating to these campaigns, and keep track of where that money's coming from. Again, the principle of follow the money. So there's a lot to be done with elections year-round. And then, of course, we have ballot initiatives and referendums. Initiatives are brought forward by the people. Groups of people that collect a certain number of signatures depending on the level of government at which something is taking place, city, state, so on. Washington State has a very active initiative scene. Some states don't have that power, but on the West Coast, most of the states on our side of the country do. And then referendums are put forward by government, and this is when they want to sort of kick the responsibility for something to the people. So if there's been a concerted long-term effort to legalize marijuana, for example, the government may wash their hands of it. And they say, you know what, we're just going to ask the people. They'll write a referendum, put it before the people, should this be a law? And then they'll be bound by what the people have said. Now, generally, referendums are not legally binding. A lot of times they're only advisory. But it does kind of provide political cover for people to do sort of radical moves, like legalizing marijuana, for example. Usually, we're mostly interested in state, county, and city elections, because most of us are not working at the national level, although we may pay attention to presidential elections. Mostly we're really interested in running who's running for power in our state and in our counties and in our cities. And so usually the institution that's responsible for holding the information about elections is the auditor. But large institutions often have standalone websites just to do with elections. King County is large enough for that case. If you were going to go to, say, Okanogan County or Ferry County, you might just go straight to the auditor's page to seek information to do with elections. This is the King County landing page for elections. And again, King County makes it pretty easy to keep track of what's going on. You can see who's running, you can see what's on the ballot. That includes all of the initiatives and referendums and so on. Keep in mind there's also the primary season versus the general election, and the primaries can be pretty important, especially in a state that has top two primaries where the top two vote getters move to the general. That means there isn't necessarily going to be one Republican and one Democrat. It could be two people from one party if those are the two top vote getters, and so on. So your choice gets limited pretty quickly after the primary elections. So the primary elections can be more important and more interesting than most people make them out to be. And then, of course, it talks about the November general election. You can get information about past candidates. And then from here, you can link to the candidate's campaign. A lot of time, this is a good way to find the point of contact for media, the press contact for each candidate, and so on. Covering candidates is no joke, let me just say that. And doing due diligence on campaign people who are campaigning is really important, and I've been embarrassed on this point more than once. The worst was there was a fellow that was running for mayor of a small town in my coverage area, and he was kind of a quirky character. He was an interesting guy, and so I just covered his campaign, sort of unquestioningly. Here's a guy that's running, and here's what he wants to do. Another reporter at another paper decided to do a Washington State Patrol background check and found out that he had he had sex crimes against children in his history. Shot his campaign down with the quickness, but I hadn't done that. So it can really, really pay off to do some due diligence. Now, Washington State Patrol background checks do cost some money. It's not very much, but it can add up. So there are other ways that you can go about looking for people's histories, but most of them do cost something. But it can be worth doing if you're really invested in a campaign or you're determined to provide critical coverage of a campaign. Covering police and crime. Now, as part of this class, what I have done is look for a lot of news clips of the kind that you might write as a person writing for a queer publication. That can be anything from light and humorous stuff to stuff that is very tragic. And unfortunately, as I've searched for news clips to show you of the kind of thing that you might wind up writing, I find an incredible number of news stories about violence against queer people, and which underscores the tragic reality that when you're covering social justice issues, especially to do with sexual and gender minorities, one of the things that you're going to be writing about is crime. And writing about crime is fraught with ethical and other considerations about how to do this in a way that's not damaging. So there's some big mistakes that you can make, and we'll come back to this throughout our course, and we've already touched on some of these. But when a person is accused of a crime, I'm just going to talk about 3 of the most important. When someone is accused of a crime, they are considered innocent until proven guilty. If you say they are guilty or imply they are guilty, you can be held liable for that in court. You can lose money for slander or libel. Libel, of course, is printed and slander is spoken. It's important to follow through on stories because I have covered many, many crimes. In no case ever has a person been pled guilty to the crime of which they have been accused, with the exception of first-degree murder trials that have gone to trial. The reason for this is most people accept plea bargains so that they won't have to go to trial and risk a high sentence. It's important to write follow-through. If you write that someone has been accused of something, circle back and write about what they were actually found guilty of. The other reason is the preliminary documents that come from police can be preposterously inaccurate. They can get people's names wrong. They can get people's cities or places of arrest wrong. They can get details radically wrong. One amusing example is when a major drug sweep took place nationwide of the Coronado Crime Syndicate, and part of that syndicate involved one of the towns that I was covering, and there was a raid enacted on a home in which a grenade was found, and this made national news. The press secretary for the Department of Justice came out and said, yes, we even found a grenade in one house, and it was in my hometown. And so I got a copy of the affidavit. Well, we'll talk more about that, but it was actually a federal court, so I got a copy of the complaint. And I wrote, these guys had been charged almost immediately, and so I was writing the names of the people who were named in the complaint, and I wrote the name of the guy who had the grenade, and apparently a 1/4 pound of cocaine. And the guy called up. He called me up and he says, "That's not my grenade." He said, that was my cocaine. All right, you got me fair and square. But that was not my grenade. That was the guy that lived in the upstairs apartment. It's sure enough, the paperwork was wrong. They had misidentified the apartment in which the grenade was found, and so I published, a clarification. This grenade was actually found on a different floor than this other guy. And it was really important to him that people know, it wasn't his grenade. So that's kind of an amusing example, but there are many examples where people are accused of things that they may not have done, or that they didn't do nearly to the extent that was stated in the charging documents. A lot of times charges are charged high so that they can plead, bargain down to something more approximating what really happened. And also people who are confronted with crime in their communities often feel fear. For example, at the University of Washington, every time the University of Washington police send out a report about a crime that has occurred so that people can know what's going on their campus, for the longest time they didn't report what happened. And many students said over and over again, we feel afraid to go out. We don't know what happened with these cases. We don't know what happens with these cases. What happens when somebody's car is broken into, or somebody's been assaulted, or somebody was mugged down on the University Avenue. And so now the university police post follow-ups about what happened with the case. And that's important to do for the emotional health of your community. What happened. When you're covering social justice issues, it becomes really important for people of groups that are particularly invested or deep stakeholders in a particular instance, such as violence against minorities, to find out if there has been accountability and what that accountability looked like, or if accountability routinely is avoided. That's something you need to know and your community needs to know. So another thing you want to really avoid doing is re-victimizing your victim. When a person has been a victim of violence, that person is in a very vulnerable state. And especially if you work crime scenes, you may be asked to approach victims at scenes. For example, major car accidents, like pileups on the freeway, that kind of coverage. Reporters will show up on the scene itself and they will ask people about their experiences there. Floods, tornadoes, that sort of thing as well. It's very important to approach people who are in shock very sensitively. We actually have whole training seminars, including actors, to do this at the University of Washington, so that people will get a sense of what it feels like to talk to someone who is grieving or in a state of terror, and know when it is appropriate and when it is not appropriate to approach, to ask questions, and to write down or otherwise note what has been said. There are people that reveal things in a state of trauma that they would not otherwise. You need to be very wise and diligent and sensitive about knowing what is appropriate to include and what may have come to you because a person was not able to give informed consent to your questions. Also, when you write about somebody, writing about somebody in a victimized way, sort of presenting them as a powerless person, can be re-traumatizing. That's why we don't use the word victim anymore. We use the word survivor, usually for the people who have endured a crime or a major tragedy. So we're also going to talk a little bit about how to follow law enforcement in the next slide. Once there has been an arrest, then there begins a court process. But that's not the only reason you'll be interested in courts. Many, many important lawsuits, the kind that eventually may proceed to the Supreme Court, for example, begin at the county and state levels. And so being able to track lawsuits to the courts is also very important. As with legislatures and bodies of government, there is a convoluted process for court cases. And there's a lot to know. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the most important things to know are so that you can know what not to waste your time on. But you do need to learn the process. A person is arrested, they're put in jail, you can find them on the jail register, then they are arraigned or formally indicted, and you can find that paperwork and find out what the the details are. Then there is a bail is set at that hearing, the charges are established at that hearing. Then there's a lot of back and forth between prosecutors and attorneys, or attorneys and lawsuits. A lot of that is procedural. It can really suck up your attention if you don't know exactly what to look for. You need to know when exactly the important stuff is. So then there may be a trial. A lot of times it can be pretty difficult to keep track of plea bargains because they happen in back rooms, sort of. So the only way you'll find out is that you'll see new paperwork filed in a case, for example. But you need to know when to be in court, when the trial is going to be, when it's not just a motion to continue and things like that, but when we're actually going to get down to the nuts and bolts. And there are actually a fair number of reporters who don't even show up for that. They show up for when the jury comes back, if there's a jury, and then they may show up for sentencing, and that's it, in the case of a criminal trial. A lot of times lawsuits are settled out of court, which is also very frustrating because it can be extremely difficult to find out the details. But you do need to know a little bit about the process if you're going to do this kind of work. Another thing is important is, once again, have friends in the court system. One of the most important people you can know is the county clerk. A lot of records to do with courts are held in the county clerk's office, and that's where you can go to find records about them. If you antagonize those people, they can throw up roadblocks that will really, really stumble you. But if they respect your work and they respect you and you respect them, they can be very, very useful to you for getting stuff you need in a timely manner. Another person that's very important to know is the prosecutor. The prosecutor has the affidavit of probable cause, and that is your most important document in a state or local trial. It's different at the federal level. There's another, you want the complaint in that case. But the affidavit of probable cause is the first major document that comes out in any crime that says, and it's the one that's similar to an indictment. It says why we believe this person is guilty of this crime and why we have decided to charge them. So after the hearing, the arraignment or the bail hearing, when charges are filed and bail is set, and this is when we begin to use the names of the people that are involved in the crime. There will be an affidavit of probable cause that the prosecutor's office has written that says why we have decided to proceed with this matter, and it's got all the juicy details. There's a lot of that stuff that you can't actually present to the public, including the names of minors. Sometimes, if sexual crimes, the details can be so horrific that you would never set them before the public. You would traumatize your victims, your survivors, far more than could ever be justifiable to put that information out about what happened to them. But it really, really makes a lot of sense to know the people at the prosecutor's office. And if it's a small county or a small city, knowing the prosecutors themselves can be enormously useful, because then all you have to do is send a quick email saying, hey, Hugh, I heard about this arrest. Do you have an affidavit on this yet? And if they're, on your side, they'll just send you the affidavit without question. But they also have the power to say no and make you jump through a lot of institutional hoops to get those documents if they're not immediately available online. So always good to keep folks on your side to the extent that you're able to. Defense attorneys, don't forget an affidavit of probable cause is written by a prosecutor. Now, there's another thing called an arrest warrant that you can get. I caution you about arrest warrants. They're written on the hoods of police cars, and they're frequently grossly inaccurate. It's not enough to just say according to police documents. I always say according to preliminary documents, which frequently are incomplete, because those documents are so sketchy and they get so much wrong. Especially in an unfolding crime like a homicide. If there's shots break out in town and somebody races over there and they arrest somebody, they write down the details of the arrest, on paperwork, basically on the hood of the car on the street. So take anything you read in an arrest warrant with a grain of salt. The one that you want to really pay attention to is the affidavit of probable cause, because that's the one where people who have had time to look through the evidence and make a decision about whether to charge in the case have put together documents about what really happened, and so it's likely to be a much more clear picture. However, this is one-sided. It is written by the prosecutor. Now, defense attorneys, morally and ethically, it's important to call the defense attorney and ask for comment. Now, defense attorneys will very seldom give you a comment because it can harm their cases later. They tend to hold their cards fairly close to their chest until it's time to negotiate a deal or to go to trial. But you should always offer somebody who is an accused person the opportunity to respond to the charges, and then you can say in your story that we reached out to comment, but defense attorneys had nothing to add at this time. And then you need to know how to read legal documents. Again, there's a lot of legalese, there's a lot to know. But if you just go directly to the documents that I have described, you don't need a whole lot of training to understand the basics. For example, go read the 45-page indictment against Donald Trump that just came out at the federal level regarding the events of January 6th. And you'll find a fairly readable document from Jack Smith and his office that details in very clear language what they believe occurred and why they think that they have enough information to charge him with a crime. It's pretty interesting stuff. And then, we'll talk a little bit more about where to look for records, and then I'll show you which records to get, because you can waste some money paying for the wrong records. So again, getting the affidavit of probable cause, very, very important. Here is the King County. Yes, this is the Division of Public Records. This actually comes from the prosecutor's office, the King County Prosecutor's Office. And so it shows the different divisions. This makes it very easy to navigate your way to people who have the records that you need. Civil division is where the lawsuits are tried. Family support and family, all of that has to do with families. Sometimes this has to do with family crimes that have taken place within families. Tragically enough, that's where a lot of sex crimes occur. So there's family support that is available to you. But you're going to be interested in civil division and criminal division. And they have phone numbers there and emails for to get a hold of the specialists who can help you find the records that you need. And you see a special note here for media requests. Well, that's you now. You are media. You don't have to be paid to be media. You don't have to be credentialed by any government association. You're media basically if you say you are. But if you can say that you represent Out Northwest or another publication, that will give you some credibility. That's good. And there are paralegals that will help you find information, because you have some privileged access to information that not everybody can just get. The media has the right to certain information. Technically everybody has it, but for media it's doubly important. And so that there's people in the larger institutions that are there simply to help you. So while it can seem intimidating to go to large organizations, like, I'm just a baby reporter just starting out, how can I call the office of the prosecutor of King County? Well, it's going to be easier to do that than it would be to call a single defense attorney, for example. That guy may not have whole systems in place to help you, but the large institutions do. So I used to really love covering federal crimes and federal lawsuits because it is so easy to get the information. There is a website called PACER, and it stands for Public Access to Court and Election. It's not election, but it's something else. I can't remember what the E stands for, but it's Public Access to Court and something records. And the way it works is genius. It's just super simple. You set up an account and you give it a credit card number, and it charges you 10 cents for every page you want to look at. And the thing is that court documents can have hundreds and hundreds of pages, so you need to know which ones to actually get. This is, so after you set up your account and so on, it can be a little confusing to navigate. So what you're doing is a query. And this shows at the top yellow block there's the query page. And it's a simple search page. And you can search by any number of things. For example, in order to make sure that I was visualizing this right, I revisited a case from long ago that I covered. And all I did, the guy's name was very, very common name, kind of a Bob Smith kind of a name. This can make your life miserable when you're covering crimes, but not with the federal courts. All I had to do was enter the last name, and it showed me the last name of all federal court cases that it involved. We are in the Western District of Washington, so it's important to know that, because once you get there, you sign up, you put in your credentials, then it'll ask you what court you want to search. And civil and criminal cases both go through the Western District of Washington, and then you can search for exactly what you're looking for. You can search by cases that are closed or open. If you're looking for criminal histories, for example, you might look just for closed and narrow down your search that way. Open is stuff that's going on right now. That's generally where reporters go to look for stuff that's going on right now. Or you can just look for everything if you're just trying to find anything you can about a single person. You can search by date, because sometimes, like, I found many people with the name I was looking for, but I knew exactly the case I was looking for, and so I ran down to 2005 and was able to find all the paperwork. But it's very easy. If you know the name of the suit, then you can go to the particular court or the particular kind of arena in which it takes place. Is it an insurance suit? And then you can look at cause of action. If you're a beginner, you may not know where to look in cause of action. You don't have to know. All you have to know is the last name or the name of the business of the person. So if you're interested in that court case where the wedding planner said they refused to make a cake for a gay couple, now it's turning out that that gay couple never actually asked for a cake. This was ginned up completely for the purposes of making a court case go through the court system. To the Supreme Court. You yourself and anyone like you can go to that particular, you can follow that case through the courts it came up through. And you can do this too. Just find out what court, what district that took place, and then search the name of the business and look for yourself. You can see the history of that entire case and any case like it in the federal system. It will bring up a list of names and dates, and working as best as you can with the information. That was weird. The information that you have, find the case that you're looking for. Then you're going to see a long list of documents. There can be dozens, and most of them are not meaningful to you. I'll give you a tip. You can look at you can click on any one of these things by going to the document number or just simply clicking on the complaint itself or the motion for detention, financial affidavit, whatever. If it is 1 page or 2 pages, it probably is not of interest to you. Anything that's 3, 4, 5 pages or more, that's what you want to look at. At 10 cents a page, you can afford to look at almost anything you want. But I'll tell you where to look first. The first one is the complaint in a criminal case. The complaint is basically the affidavit of probable cause at the federal level. And it tells you all of the reasons that the prosecutor, the state in this case, has for believing that a crime has occurred. You can also then, the next one to look up would be the indictment. So an indictment is similar to an arraignment in many cases. That's where they've decided what charges to file based on the information that they have gained. So the case that I was covering was a drug case. It was a meth lab. It was a big meth lab. And the complaint had to do with what the undercover officers had said. And then once they got up there, the complaint was to get the warrant so that they could go search. Same as the affidavit of probable cause, sort of. And then you get the indictment, and that's after they've looked at the evidence, what they're exactly going to charge you with. Then there's a whole lot of stuff that's not going to interest you, that goes on for forever. And then we get to the plea deal. and the plea deal is going to be really interesting. And then there are letters that come from the prosecutor that say what their recommendations for sentencing. Sentencing recommendation documents are very, very interesting. And usually this is when the details of the case have actually really emerged. They can be strikingly different from the original documents. In the case of the meth lab that I was covering, the guy who had the meth lab had actually cleaned up his act and gotten into rehab 6 months before he was arrested. And so it added a unique twist to the case. What do you do with a guy who was already trying to go straight? And so that information appeared in the letter from his attorney, kind of the appeal to the court about sentencing recommendations. And it showed up that he had actually been kind of on the straight and narrow and was trying to turn his life around, and he actually got a pretty limited sentence as a result. So that stuff can be very, very interesting. But PACER is a lot of fun, actually, if you're sort of interested in justice and courts, because it is so easy to navigate and so easy to learn, and so many people don't use it, and you can get access to so much information. That if you do this is definitely one of the things I enjoyed the most. Okay, this is a good point at which to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what to do when people start trying to withhold information from you, or when people are not necessarily helping you out and you still need the information. We're going to talk about public records next. Okay, we're back. In this part two of today's discussion of finding information, finding things to write about, and then finding the information that you need to at least begin and do your research and orient yourself to a case or an issue. The matter of public records. Public records, you have a right to a great deal of information, but getting that information can sometimes be very, very difficult because there is information that you do not have a right to. And the people who have the information have to sort that out. And so you may be asking for all of the emails of a particular legislator, for example, that you suspect of engaging in some wrongdoing and making shady deals. People are so ridiculously indiscreet with their emails. People who know better, political operatives who've been in office for years, who have watched this sort of thing bring down their colleagues, still will write letters to their mistresses on their business, on their legal email, their public email. It continues to shock me, and it probably always will, how indiscreet people are in emails and in other message channels, such as DMs on Twitters and so on. The thing to know is public officials, their communications with each other are almost always available to you. However, when you go asking for a batch of emails, you don't automatically get every email. For example, emails between a person and their attorney are not available to you. Emails that are privileged to do with employment concerns at a firm, for example, whether or not somebody gets fired, those things can be off limits to you. And also deeply personal stuff between someone and their spouse, talking about what to get for dinner, that sort of thing, or what to do about a kid who's just gotten in trouble at school, that sort of thing. Those things can be withheld. And so somebody has to go through all of those records and pick out the ones that you have access to and give them to you. And that can be a pretty big and pain in the ass for them. So, best thing you can do for yourself is go into it with a good attitude. Don't go in throwing your elbows around, being all hostile and aggressive, and trying to play the part of a hard-nosed reporter. That's not the way to get what you want. Now, there's some ethical considerations to do here with about how far we go to maintain our access to information, and this is where we push it to the absolute edge quite frequently when we are pushing for papers that people want to keep from us. But we talk about having a document state of mind. When you are working in this arena where there's very high stakes, people are going to be found guilty of crimes, or people are going to be held guilty in the court of public opinion for wrongdoing of an ethical nature, or so on. You have to have documents for everything that you claim, and you got to have stuff to support everything that you do. You have to have documents. You have to have documentation for every sentence that you write. And you need to get those documents. So the first thing to do is firmly fix in your mind, I'm going to get that document. I'm going to find what there is and I'm going to get it. And because it sometimes can take an incredible amount of determination. Then begin with the assumption that what you're looking for is private. I mean, is public. If it is private, someone will tell you, but ask for it. Because, for example, I covered a case where a guy, the county executive of Snohomish County, was found taking his mistresses on public junkets and paying for that with the public funds, right? And he could try to make the case that, you know, communication with his mistress actually was private, but assume it's public, and in that case it was, and we were able to retrieve it, and he's no longer the county executive. Also assume it's free. In many cases it is. One of the things that big institutions used to do to try to hamstring reporters was make it very expensive to get records. Now that there are state laws that make it so that they can't charge, I believe the last time I checked it was 10 cents a page. But begin with the assumption that it's free. And then if there is a charge, let them tell you what it is. If it seems exorbitant, then you've got some digging around to do to find out what you can do to challenge that. But in most cases, these are professionals and they know, you know, how much to charge you and so on. Also, you can request databases, and data-driven journalism is some of the most powerful journalism out there. If you know how to search a database, and you know how to use a JSON file and things like that, then or if you know the difference between tab delimited and comma delimited, databases and how to put those in spreadsheets and so on, you can do incredible work. And I'll show a couple of examples on a future slide. But you can get databases and you can request them, and they have to turn them over to you, entire databases. So, for example, you may want to find out statistics on how many people of sexual minorities get fired from jobs as opposed to people, cisgendered people or straight people, whatever. And you can maybe get that data from the Department of Employment. You can call up and ask for termination records, perhaps that have gone to, where did I used to get this stuff? I think I went to the unemployment office to see people who had applied for unemployment, the statistics on people applying for unemployment. If people of sexual minorities are applying at a higher rate than that they are represented within the body of workers in the state, something's up, right? So you can request a database. You can request their entire database of terminations for an entire year if you've got the bandwidth to search it. And they can give you massive databases that are so huge that you actually have to keep them not on your computer but on hard drives that are big enough to manage them. But if you're good with data, you can get them. But keep in mind, they have to give you that stuff, okay? So if you're good with data, ask for it. Ask for the largest body of data you can. Databases are pretty easy for them to turn over. It's not the same as an email request or other kinds of public records requests, as, like I've mentioned before, is what's happening at the University of Washington to the Professor Kate Starbird. Okay, so attitude. Go in with the attitude that you have the right to it. It should be free, no matter how big it is or unwieldy it is. If it's a public organization that's paid for with public funds, you can get it. And then go in and treat the people who have the power to give you that information with respect, with humor, be friendly. Don't be hostile and aggressive. They still have to give it to you if you are, but trust me, you want these people on your side, if at all possible. If you have to be hostile, be hostile. Okay, so here are some examples of stories that people have done using data that I was able to find last night in a Google search. Queer in the country, why some LGBTQ Americans prefer rural life to urban neighborhoods. So these reporters did a search to find out how many people of sexual minority or a gender identity minority were living in rural areas. And I don't know where they got that data, but it's really interesting. I believe there was a study that came out on it because I found several stories on this topic. But this is data driven. Then also from bathrooms to pronouns and parents' rights. Connecticut schools, this is from the Connecticut Current, Tri-Herald Current. Schools lack policies on transgender and non-binary students. So they got the information for every school district in the state and looked at their policies to do with transgender and non-binary students and found out that most of those school districts don't have policies in place. I'm happy to inform you that Seattle Public Schools has very comprehensive policies in place that are also quite progressive. Then here's one that's kind of fun. The Wall Street Journal did a data-driven story on how how the music in Hamilton differed from music in other. Hamilton, as you know, as many of you probably know, uh, relied heavily on hip hop forms, and so they talk about the difference in the forms of music that are used in Hamilton versus other more traditional musicals. And it's a great story. You should click on the link. You can click on the link if you access this file in the folder, which it will be available to you within the next couple of days. So that's data as well, just data of a different kind. There are a lot of open government guides that are out there to help you find this kind of information. One of them is Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. You can go there to find resources, what to do if you get stonewalled, places where you can find rich information for each state. So you can go to Oregon or Washington, wherever you happen to do. There's an open records ombudsman whose whole job it is to make sure that open records are held open the way that they are supposed to be. And if you suspect you are being stonewalled, you can reach out to that ombudsman. Once again, there's a link there on that slide that you can revisit should you need it. And every single institution, whether it be a school, a county, a jail, a legislature, um, a major hospital, every publicly funded institution should have somebody in charge of keeping records. Oh my God, a bird just hit my window. Okay, that was frightening. Um, so it's important to be able to figure out who those people are, but know that they exist. They're quite frequently called a public information officer. So if you don't know who it is, that's the first person to call up. If you call like the main desk and for a school district and you say, "Hello, I'm so-and-so from whatever media source, and I'm hoping to speak to your public information officer." Fire districts have these, police departments have these. Everybody has these, so they'll know what you're looking for. They have different titles. Sometimes they're called communication directors and so on, or media personnel, but they've got somebody whose job it is to talk to you. Smaller institutions, like little tiny city halls, not so much, but they'll know what you're asking for and they'll know where to send you for information, often the clerk and so on. Okay, this is how to ask for information. Now, if you've cultivated friends, a lot of times this is a matter of just asking. You know, the hospital knows that something bad is happening to their hospital and they want the reporters to write about it. They'll basically be waiting for you to show up at their desk. And then you say, "Hey, can I get all the emails or whatever that have had to do with this takeover from somebody's desk, like the CEO's desk?" And they'll be standing there waiting to give you them, you know. Sometimes it can be as simple as just asking, but sometimes it's not. And so if you know what it is you're looking for, then it becomes important to know what kind of documents are out there. Emails are a big favorite. Everybody likes to look at emails, but you can look at people's calendars. For public figures, generally have public schedules. For example, the president, every minute of his day is accounted for on a public calendar, where he is and what he's doing. So you can look for people's calendars to find out who they're meeting with. There's phone records from major legislative offices, including presidents, governors. You can look for people's expense logs. That's how we found out that the county executive of Snohomish was expensing his mistress's expenses, even for sex toys. I'm not even beginning of a lie. They publicly expensed intimacy kits. You can look for people's budgets. You can look for their emails. So kind of think a little outside of the box about where you could go for information. Uh, Also, know who's the keeper of the keys of the data in a major organization, and be able to know some of the language, like I mentioned before. If you're good at data, then know what a comma delimited file is, or know what a tab delimited file is, and be able to answer that question when they ask you what you want. Know if you want a CSV or other kind of spreadsheet. Know if you want a JSON file, things like that. If you know that person, the data analyst, a lot of times they'll tell you what it is you're looking for. You're like, look, man, I'm not a data genius, but I do know what I need to find. And they'll say, hey, well, here, why don't I give you this? This, I think, has everything you need, and it won't overwhelm you, stuff like that. And then also record retention. That's records that have been retained going back into history. A lot of times you'll be looking for historical stuff, like, for example, has the county executive done this before? You can ask for record retention records to find out historical stuff, but it's good to familiarize yourself with the things that are available so you know what to ask for. And also, just if you're not sure if it's available, ask. If it isn't, they'll tell you no. Then sometimes they'll just give it to you, but quite frequently they'll ask you to fill out a form. That covers their posteriors. So there's two things that you can fill out. Again, we're talking about the difference between federal and state records and other kinds of public records. When you're filing for federal records, what you're looking for is the Freedom of Information Act. And you fill out a Freedom of Information Act request. There's paperwork that you can fill out, say exactly what you want. And then for state and local, there's public disclosure requests, which is the same thing. And once you've filed a public information request, a clock starts ticking. And they have a certain amount of time to get you those records. If they don't get you those records within that amount of time, they either have to file for an extension and provide a good reason, or they have to pay you money. And in fact, I was following one case where an activist in a town filed public requests, and the cities tried to stonewall her, ended up having to pay her more than $100,000 because they charged they were charged $100 for every day they withheld those files. So, it can be worth the effort, really, to stay on them. Now, make it easy for them and for yourself. So if you're walking up to a desk, like the city clerk or some other records office, show up with a flash drive, show up with a nice big one, so that they can give you, in the day we used to carry CDs, but now we're down to flash drives and other kinds of drives. That way you show up with something big enough to get the database that you need, unless it's so large that it's going to take days to download it, which happens. If you want to avoid paying for many, many, many pages of documents, you can show up with a camera and have them actually put the documents on the counter. You flip through until you see the page you want and take pictures. And that way you can avoid document fees. There's now apps on your phone that will scan photos to PDF. Very, very useful. Then, ask for things that can be emailed to you. If they're small enough, like 10 megabytes or less of information, or 5, depending on what your email allows you to send, or ask for things to be put into a Dropbox for you and provide a link. If you are an investigative journalist and this is kind of your jam, this can be a really time-consuming process with many, many, many steps, and people very, very happy to stonewall you at each step. So keep a spreadsheet going about where you left it on each one of your cases, so which step you're at, when the deadline is, by when they have to give you the information, who you asked, um, what it is specifically that you've asked for, what the next step is, and so on. That will really, really help you stay focused on the pursuit of documents that people are trying to hide or trying to discourage you from getting. Um, Again, there are resources that you can use to help you get open records. There is that Open Records Ombudsman. If you suspect somebody is trying to withhold things from you, you can reach out to that organization, or you can go there simply for information about what you can ask for, things like that. Again, Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Then if you're a student journalist, there's a Student Press Law Center that's very, very helpful to tell you what laws are on your side. Then there's the National Freedom of Information Committee. And there's links here that will help you link to any one of those organizations to help you run down documents that are proving, or data that are proving difficult to get. Now, you'll get a number of excuses from people who are trying to withhold information from you. So you begin by asking for the document or the data retention schedule to show when things have been filed and so on. And collect all the blank forms, the FOIA, or we call it FOIA, Freedom of Information is a FOIA request, or a PDR request. Get all those blank things, fill them all out when you need them. Meet the people that are supposed to give you this stuff if you ask. Get to know them, make friends if you can. Do mind your P's and Q's when you're filling out your requests. Be thorough and clear on what you want. And find out how those things are stored, whether they're in JSON files or whatnot. So inform yourself about all of that stuff to make it easy. And then when you are greeted with these excuses, you'll have things that you can say in response. When you're asking for information, don't be as non-specific as you can in some cases. So including but not limited to language means so including all the, if you're looking for emails from the CEO of a hospital to the person who's considering buying the hospital, you can say including but everything to do with this sale, including but not limited to communication with the person who's trying to buy it. Because you might miss important stuff if you don't. There may be other conversations that have happened on the side that will be quite revealing that are not between those two people. You wouldn't know. So you say including and not limited to, then you'll get everything on that topic. If they tell you no, then you ask them to provide their legal reason why they think they're legally allowed to not give it to you. If they say it contains confidential information, then say please redact. And they have the legal responsibility to go through and redact the stuff that you can't see. Now, you don't necessarily have to trust that they're only redacting stuff that they're legally allowed to redact. That's employee records, that's private stuff, that's privileged, confidential, attorney-client privilege stuff. They can redact stuff and show you black bars over words, and you have no idea what they are. If you suspect that they're redacting things inappropriately, you can ask for a thing called an in-camera review, where an independent, usually a judge, will look at it and make the determination if those things have been improperly redacted. If they have, there's pretty significant penalties for the people who have done it. So be aware that you don't have to trust or depend on them. Sometimes they say, if we give it to you, we have to give it to everyone, in which case you reply, indeed you do. Indeed you do. Now, I do want to make some statements about how to do this responsibly, because you can actually cripple organizations by doing this in kind of a hostile and aggressive way. Other things that you'll hear, and I've heard all of these, is the key person is on vacation. Okay, you can, if you suspect that's actually true, you can cut them a little bit of slack. But if you don't know if it's true or if you don't care, then then you'll have to get somebody else to do it. I mean, the law provides that we should have these within this particular amount of time. We don't want you to do a negative story. Oh, that used to burn me. I was like, you have no power over what I write. How about you don't do a negative thing? How about you don't hide negative information? How about when I call you up asking for comment, that you give your side of the story, right? They may try to stonewall you with large fees. That's a good time to go to the ombudsman. And this is the most common one. This is a huge request. We'll need months to pull it together. Well, if you've made a huge request, fair enough. The city of Gold Bar is a tiny little town in East Snohomish County. They have exactly 4 people working at City Hall. The mayor, for a while, had to mow the lawn of the City Hall because they were hit with so many aggressive and hostile freedom of or public records requests from one particular kind of aggrieved person in the community that they had to take one of those 4 people and just put them on the job of putting together all the information this person was requesting. It also bankrupted the town of Black Diamond, Washington. These sunshine laws will not exist forever if they're continuously abused like this. So if you're going to make a huge request, don't do it to harass people. That's a political weapon that's happening now, and it's good for no one. Focus your requests responsibly. Ask only for what you need or what you think is important. And if it's a huge request, this may actually be true. They may need months. So if they can't meet it by the deadline, there is a deadline. I believe a 90-day clock starts ticking once you've made these requests. If they need more time, they will file. If you begin to suspect that they're filing to stonewall you, then you can reach out to the Ombudsman or some of the other organizations that can help you. But this is the most common way you'll get stonewalled. They'll hope that you'll just lose interest in the case. Quite frequently that happens. Unfortunately, the pace of news is so fast. This is one of the most efficient ways people can keep you from finding information they don't want you to have. But you are volunteer journalists and you have the luxury of time. So you are the people that can stay on it for months at a time. So hold them to the first deadline, and if they can't meet it, let them go prove to the appropriate institution why it is that they can't. All right, and then here's a little way to get started. This is the University of Washington's resource on journalism, but this is information where you can go to find more about public records and what it is you can request and so on. When we meet again on the 20th, we're going to pivot back to writing skills, and we're going to begin talking about the most basic form of writing in news, the most traditional, which is the pyramid style of writing. And we'll begin by writing little news briefs together. I hope to be able to be with you on Zoom for that meeting, and then later this year we'll begin to meet in person. But thank you for joining me, and I hope that you find this interesting enough to go snoop around for yourself and see what you can get, because this can be really fascinating and really, really fun.